Welcome to this episode of AU Manufacturing Conversations with Brent Balinski, featuring one of the companies we're putting forward as part of our quest to identify Australia's 50 most innovative manufacturers. This is the first time we've ever run this campaign, and we absolutely, positively couldn't have gone ahead without the generous help of Bosch Australia Manufacturing Solutions, SMC Corporation Australia, and lead sponsor MYOB. MYOB is a business management platform that brings together key workflows to fit business needs. MYOB has been part of the fabric of doing business in Australia and New Zealand for more than 30 years and integrates manufacturing, inventory management and accounting to help businesses streamline business processes. Munib and Tom, thank you very much for joining us here on AU Manufacturing Conversations. Good to be speaking with you.
Nice to be with you, Brent. Great to be here.
So let's get underway. I'd like for you both to please introduce yourselves and some of the work you're involved in and a bit about your career path.
Tom, do you want to start first?
Oh, you can start.
Okay, so I've been in the industry and innovation world for many years. I'm almost I'm embarrassed to say how many years. And I accumulated a lot of great learnings through my career, and it culminated with establishing this wave design consulting company with the main focus on helping established organizations to navigate innovation and leverage human-centered design as a way of delivering outcomes for customers and clients. On top of that, I have been teaching at university, HSM, for many years, and teaching design innovation subject for MBA students, and I especially enjoyed teaching executive MBAs. And from time to time, I write some interesting stuff. I actually believe that are the key aspects relevant for business community, and I really enjoy doing that and engaging with people.
Nice. And Thomas, what about yourself?
My name's Tom. So I've been in the innovation space for about 12, 13 years now, which when I think about it, it's quite frightening. And I started off as an industrial designer, which is sort of the product design space, and quickly moved into, I suppose, a bit more strategic design. I've been doing projects across government, banking, a bit of health and pharmaceuticals, both sort of in-house and as in consulting. And I suppose what I really enjoy about, especially working at Wave Design, is it really brings together three facets of design, of innovation that makes it impactful. So really understanding what users need, also understanding how businesses work and what they need, but also understanding that tech side of it as well, and bringing all those things together to make very interesting solutions.
Very good. And how long have you both been working together for?
Well, it depends. Tom used to work in my AMP team, and then we have been here for 2.5 years, Tom, or something like that.
I think it's about 2.5 years.
Right. So you've said a little bit about what Wave Design does. I'd like to get a little more expansive sort of description about some of the companies you work with. You mentioned some sectors there, but if you could expand a little bit on that and say, your approach and where you try and, play niche-wise.
So I think what we do for companies, we can put it in three buckets. One is we really want to solve the problem for the companies, whatever they have, especially like products, services, processes, and we apply human-centered design with that, and we enjoy really doing that. So some companies have challenges with orientation, how to do that in strategic view or strategic direction. We help them to develop strategy, innovation strategy, human-centered design strategy, and which should be aligned with the business strategy. And the third thing is we really help them to build this kind of innovation or human-centered design capabilities, because we believe that if companies don't actually build internal teams and the awareness and some sort of knowledge about that, it will not go far in terms of innovation. It will always rely on external consultants. We think it is important that they do that internally. So these are the kind of three main things what we do. And a very important aspect of that is that we would like to create an impact together with people who are working with. Together means we engage their subject matter experts, when we uplift their understanding how the innovation works and how you deliver innovation, how you work on innovation. And then when we leave the company, that they can actually have the team continue doing that and making sure that it is implemented in the right way.
It's not the sole reason we know each other, but we've worked together recently. You guys have been kind enough to help us with the Australia's 50 Most Innovative Manufacturers campaign, and thanks again for that. Related to that, I'd like to get your personal definitions, please, of innovation, and has this changed much for either or both of you over your careers?
All right, I might jump in here. So what we've been seeing, especially in Australia over the last couple of years about innovation, is that it's been treated a bit like a Christmas party, and the fact that it's probably a little bit drunk. So it's built in this way where everyone gets excited about being part of it. They do have a very good time doing it, but at the end they're left pretty disoriented with potentially some questionable decisions about what they've got up to and no real set direction where to go. And that's sort of, when you sum it up, it's like all fun, no action. And I think that's where our definition of what innovation is really comes to the forefront, which is that innovation is essentially an idea that drives value. And what we're seeing with organisations is they're seeing innovation as having to be these massive spectacles where they bring everyone together. They do things like hackathons. But what they're not understanding is that there's a real discipline that goes from start to finish to really make the value come out of that innovation. It's much more than that spectacle. And one of the ways that we've been seeing that innovation works best is if you start with the human or the people that are using it, and really using that HCD approach to drive innovation, because it allows you to really understand what people need and what their desires are. So then you're not caught in this trap where you're just coming up with ideas in isolation.
So it's about driving value. It's about being sober during this. It's about being disciplined, and it's about putting the human at the center of the process.
Yeah, spot on. And this is a very important aspect, that when you put discipline and structuring it that way, there are some certain processes, as Tom explained in applying human-centered design. You have a kind of very clear process that is very proven methodology. And it's almost guaranteed success if you are disciplined with that. But very often people are not disciplined, and they blame the process rather than internal kind of inability to address something.
So you mentioned implementation, and that's the guts of innovation, I guess, rather than invention, which is sometimes unfortunately confused with innovation. Tell me, please, about the importance of putting a human at the center of implementation and how that might look like in practice.
Well, it's a very good question, actually. And Guy Kawasaki, he put a quote a while ago, and people love quoting him, which was saying, ideas are easy, implementation is hard. Well, what we think is implementation is hard because we treat ideas very easy. Because we, as Tom mentioned earlier, people are coming with different ideas, but actually, in essence, they are not an idea. They are some thought, and then not very well framed thought. So in order to actually have a smooth transition to implementation, we need to do a lot of work upfront, framing this idea from understanding the problem, our end users are dealing with. And end users could be customers, it could be consumers, it could be our internal people, employees. So we need to understand them, and then once we understand them, we can go in some abstract space where we frame these ideas, and we go from abstract space into physical space with prototypes. And then you do the prototypes and trying to figure out, test some assumptions. And then as you're testing these assumptions, it can give you more clarity for implementation, and people will be much more comfortable driving the implementation. And then we usually call this first phase. A lot of companies are, as soon as you have an idea, say, let's build a business case. And we're saying, hang on a minute, probably might be an idea to actually establish customer case first, which means all of these things that I mentioned. And then once you get approved some hypotheses or assumptions, then you start building business case, because you have a lot of certainty about that people desire or people see value in your idea. And if you're jumping into just from your thought into implementation, you will face a lot of uncertainty.
So I've actually got an example of where that happened to me, where I was brought in right at the end of the project, and they're like, why is no one actually picking up this product that they made? Because it was built all around the business case, and the business case made sense, and it was going to deliver a lot of value to consumers, but also the economy. And then they got me in to do research on why is no one picking this up? Like, what is the value proposition for the user? And the result was essentially the value proposition wasn't there. It wasn't giving a significant uplift for them. They didn't see any difference between this and what already existed. So essentially a lot of money was wasted in this implementation based on a business case without ever actually understanding what it was solving for the end user.
Example of business case, yes. Customer case, no.
Pretty much.
And missed pretty much, yeah.
Yep. Should we talk now about the role of learning and looking at a return on learning? I'd like to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, well, I usually, when I talk to leaders, and there is a very nice quote from ex-Nokia CEO when Microsoft acquired Nokia because Nokia went in trouble not following the market and introducing smartphone. And then he was actually at a press conference and he was almost crying and saying, I don't understand, we haven't done anything wrong, but somehow we failed. So, and that's the kind of message, and I use that quote and have a discussion with leaders. And then immediately readers started recognizing this. Well, if you haven't done anything wrong, you actually didn't learn. And that's why it is important to have experiment, to actually be kind of curious about some things. And then you actually go and learn from people, go and try to build these insights, understanding people's emotions, their drive, their empathy in order to go to the person. But you also need to understand your internal people, and then you give them a space for failures. And then failures are in the way if they translate them into learning, and it actually creates great value, not just for that concept development, it could create great value for organizations too. And then we're creating completely different culture. So, and that we usually position that in two broad groups, like knowers and the learners. And knowers are people, we have done this, we know how it works, and that is not going to work here, we are hopeless with this, and something like that. And on the other side, you have a learners who are saying, oh, what's the problem? How can we go through this? Is there anything we can do more? Can you explain this further? I'm curious to understand where we go with this. And then this is kind of environment where we say, we usually, in business case, we measure return on investment, but we actually position this as a return on learning. We need to actually figure out how we learn and what we learn, because it is massive kind of savings in terms of money that we spend. We usually rush into this, many things, and we figure out, well, it's not working, and we have a write-off and then keep going. So I think learning is something that we need to put more attention, but also allowing, as leaders, allowing people to fail in order to learn.
So it's important, I would guess, to, when looking at a problem, whatever that is, to approach it with a certain amount of humility and just think, well, I've worked on maybe a similar thing, but I don't know about this, and I'm happy to approach it like it's the first time I've seen it.
That's right. By default, organizational knowledge is increasing as we spend time and years working in the organization. But in the same time, we are losing kind of connection with end users and understanding them. We believe that we project ourselves into them. We need to actually figure out the way that we kind of reduce that gap between what we know in our organization and how external world functions.
We'd like to take another moment now to acknowledge our sponsors, MYOB, as well as Bosch Australian Manufacturing Solutions and SMC Corporation Australia. There would be no Australia's 50 Most Innovative Manufacturers campaign without them. Be sure to check them each out via the links in the show notes and give them a follow on LinkedIn. I believe this relates to an article I've seen on your website that talks about getting from leaps of faith to leaps of logic. And would you like to talk about that, or do you think you perhaps discussed it above and it's not worth going into?
Tom, do you want to address it?
Sure. I think the best analogy for this is actually a story about one of my friends who was racing to the train one day and raced past all the signs thinking he knew exactly where he was going, ended up on the express train, arrived at the station and basically had to wait 6 hours for the next train to come or get a very, very expensive taxi ride to where he wanted to be. And that's kind of really what the leaps of faith and leaps of logic is about, in terms of you might be planning out these corporate plans over multiple years and you say, this is what's happening, this is where we're going to go. But at no point do you sort of check back and say, actually, is this the right place? Have you seen the right signposts? Are you heading in the right direction? And you actually have the opportunity to say, maybe if I wasn't on the express train, I wouldn't have ended up in the wrong place.
And then if you translate what Tom is saying from his friend's example, in the business environment, and I've been in that environment for many years, chairing investment committees, writing business cases. So what happened when we come with a strat plan, here's the initiative, and we say, let's build a business case. And we build a business case based on unvalidated assumptions. And we jump into implementation mode without actually validating some of these critical assumptions. And when we start we thought we have a clear view, but we started working on that, it started becoming messy. And that's why people are saying implementation is hard, because we haven't actually tested this assumption. And then we push harder and we deliver on time and budget, whatever is there. And then we deliver things on time and budget, but we miss to move the dial. We don't move the dial for customer. We don't move the dial for company. Mm-hmm. And that's the situation, what we call nice landing, wrong airport. Because people, they believe they are great in implementation, but they actually don't go back and question them. But even worse, we say that we are not getting expected results. Let's brainstorm how we can get better results. But while we're brainstorming, we might exaggerate the problem because we didn't go back and understand what is the activity, what problem this activity will solve for our customers, for our company, for our employees. Instead of having leap of faith that what we have in business case and then we will implement, which very often we know it's not the case. We have a leap of faith that will happen. We are exposed to big risk because we might write off some of the investments. Instead of that, what our approach is to look at these leaps of logic. And then leaps of logic means we start with the small leaps and we can always have time to move direction, to enhance our direction. And for example, the first leap might be, let's actually frame the problem. And then we frame the problem. Let's talk to people who are experiencing the problem. Then the next leap might be, let's gather some ideas based on these learnings from these people. And then let's build a prototype. The next step, test the prototype. So while we are doing that, we are testing assumptions and validating assumptions. We are reducing number of assumptions, which means at the same time, we are reducing our risk and exposure, risk of funding and risk of managing things, because we are getting into certain situation that when we invest money, that we can get return on that.
To add to that, the external landscape and the user landscape can actually change as these things go through as well. So by taking those steps to check back in as you're fleshing out ideas, prototyping ideas can actually give you a bit of a feel about what's going on in the external world. There may be sort of new opportunities that are arising. So it does allow you to reorient and aim for what will actually deliver value in the end.
And I've also, just to support what Tom was saying in the practical example, we deal with one company. And we thought the idea was actually to create a timeline where people will be subscribed to which was financial services company. They'll subscribe because people trust in financial services, and they will subscribe there and they can store their family kind of documents, messages, mortgages, superannuation, and all of these things. That was a great idea as a timeline. So we were progressing that to the point that everybody was happy, and we started prototyping. And at that point, we realized people are saying, well, I'm not going to engage just because of the timeline into this organization. It must be much more reason for me to do that. And we tested the prototype. But have in mind, we didn't lose a lot of money when we did this prototype testing because it was very low fidelity paper prototype. We just invited a few people and talked to them. So, and then if we didn't follow that in the traditional way, we could say, oh, this is a great idea. Let's build this timeline, and we can spend millions of dollars building the system, realizing that people will not engage just to be part of this timeline. And we discovered, we're not spending a lot of money, we discovered we shouldn't invest money now into this. And therefore, we should park it for now and see what are the key underlying reasons why people will join the company, and then introduce as a value-add service. And this is exactly what happened.
A lot of what you've said above, to work well and to be effectively deployed in a company, you have to have a culture that welcomes that, and a culture that's working with an innovation mindset rather than just kludging together some innovation tools and saying, okay, this is how it might work, so let's toy with this. Tell me about going from tools to mindset.
So I think the main kind of aspect on that is, you see, the mindset is critically important here. And the mindset in the way that you are creating value for an end user, whoever that end user is. I hate to call this end user, it's more customer, consumer, employees, but it's kind of a long debate to explain.
Yep.
But in order to change the mindset, we don't go and say, hey, here are 5 PowerPoint slides, And this is how you're going to change your mind. And this is a very traditional way how people usually do it. You have 5 behaviors on PowerPoint slides, and we expect people in companies to behave like that. So it is important to have a systemic approach in the way that you are defining the approach, how you are going to introduce innovation or how you are going to deliver innovation. So from problem framing right to the implementation, then people are familiar with this framework. They know, they have some certainty that how to do that. But once you introduce this framework, if you don't go and actually equip that with methods and tools, then the problem here is people will not be able to understand how to actually practice this approach. And then even if you have a methods and tools, if you don't actually train people with these methods and tools, then again, you are not going far. So, but it kind of sounds like, very significant operation, but it could go very quickly. And people are so enthusiastic. We know because we probably train, we spend time with probably more than 1,500 people in corporate world and probably around 1,000 students. It's kind of, these methods and tools are common sense. I will just give you an example. Everybody agreed that we need to spend more time in understanding the problem. We very quickly skip understanding the problem and jump into solution mode very quickly. And a lot of leaders say, I don't want to hear about problems, I want to hear about solutions. But actually, and as Einstein was saying, if I have an hour to kind of solve the world's biggest problem, I will spend 55 minutes on understanding the problem and 5 minutes on solution. And then everybody, once we talk about this, people say, okay, we are convinced we need to focus on problem frame. But then the question is how we do it. And there are some certain methods and tools that how you frame the problem. And then you introduce these methods and tools, and when you train people, it's kind of very easy exercise. Hey, we need to frame the problem. Yes, within 15 minutes you have a problem frame. But, at the beginning, even people starting doing that, it is kind of, they need to learn. But, this is what I'm saying. This is the way how you change the mindset, because you're giving them the approach, methods and tools, and you actually make them familiar with these methods and tools by training. And then when you work in the project, you are applying these methods and tools, and then you will see the impact on mindset shift.
And Tom?
So probably a good practical example is I was actually maybe 4 years apart, worked on a very similar project for 2 different organisations that were in pharmaceuticals, and they essentially came to the same conclusion. One, I was brought in at the end for the first one. It was meant to be like a post-diagnostic implementation review because they'd spent millions of dollars on this new function that they set up, and it wasn't working for people. And it was one of those examples of where they just sort of picked up the toolbox, like, yes, this is human-centered design, we'll go speak to the people. But they just really asked them, well, what do you want? Rather than sort of understanding how they worked and what they needed. And the result was a big difference in the behaviours of how they expected people to use this and the behaviours of how they use this. At a later stage, did a very similar project, but it really started off with, let's understand what the problem is. Let's spend that time to really unpack how people are using it. What are the behaviours? What's the right context for these to help solve that problem? And the other aspect to that is I actually brought the people that were part of the project along with it. So as we were going through, we were partnered with them, sort of learning as they were learning as we go. And they started to really understand, I suppose, what it was all about and why we were doing things. And it started to actually transfer that agency of the project and what it was trying to achieve, how it should work, back to the people that were really involved with it so they could pick it up and sort of run with it. It's progressing towards implementation, but with a lot more certainty and also a mindset shift about how they might need to work.
So it's a bit of a change of gears, but it's a standard question for this series, and I'd like to ask it of you guys. What's an issue within manufacturing that isn't getting the attention it deserves?
Well, I think there are a couple of things here, Brent. I think that it's significantly different in the manufacturing world from the rest of the economy and industries, because we actually need to create an environment where we will support creative thinking, creative problem solving, and ideas, and people who are coming in that they can go through this process and streamline this process in a much easier way. I think specifically for manufacturers, I think it's mindset. It's kind of a mindset that we need to achieve scale very quickly instead of what's the uniqueness of my product. And what we found when we talk to clients and we do work for them, very often it's not actually exact problem in the product. It's more and how product functions. But it's more like, is this designed in the kind of way that humans can interact easily? And the second one is how we service these products. And very often we don't explain properly how a product is functioning, and then how can people actually interact with the product and use the product. And that's the kind of challenge that we found. And the second thing is we are lacking support from government. We're lacking the vision from government. I recently saw Queensland government actually had a very good innovation strategy and how they are going to stimulate companies in Queensland to focus more on innovation. And I wish we have that on federal level too, or at least in all other states. So it's kind of having this R&D tax scheme is really kind of giving people some savings, and the people will not innovate because of the tax advantages. And that's the wrong way to stimulate people thinking about innovation as a tax advantage. So it has to be some more cooperative way between private business and government to stimulate certain areas. And for many years, we neglected these renewable energy kind of resources. And I know that some people from my university, they invented some certain things and they didn't get any attraction in Australia. They went overseas and they created a big boom out of that. So, and that's kind of very important next kind of component, which is basically how manufacturers leverage universities from IP. There's a lot of research. There is a lot of interesting ideas coming out from academia, and people are very passionate about their field. But we see commercialization of these kind of aspects is on very low level. And then if we have a more proactive manufacturers connecting with universities and trying to figure out the way that I can leverage that, it would benefit massively. I've seen somewhere data that manufacturing contributed to our GDP at 92. I think it was 14%. And today is contributing only 6%, which is telling us something that something is kind of need to change. And I think innovation is the way that we start actually putting a little bit up on the level what we actually manufacture. It's not like, we are doing millions of products and services, more what's the quality of that, what value we create for it.
Tom and Munib, it's been fun to have you on the program, but we are rapidly approaching the end. Before you go, I'd just like to ask if you have any final words to share. Is there perhaps a website address you'd like to leave with listeners, or a few thoughts, or anything else? The floor's all yours.
So, Brent, I think what I believe there are the four main things that might be relevant for your listeners if they want to kind of deal with innovation. Number one is leaders need to understand the importance of innovation for their business growth. The way that they start actually doing that is establishing the innovation capabilities in the organization, which is my second point. Establishing innovation capabilities will enable them to deliver these new things in very sustainable way and very consistent way. And the third point is actually working with external experts, but only when they establish their internal capabilities, and then they will drive external experts and pinpoint exactly where the external experts can help them, because they can't have all expertise in the organization, and that's why they draw the expertise, but it has to be very targeted with the focus on innovation. And as the last point, innovation has to be positioned in the right way in the organization. So very often innovation is kind of buried somewhere down, and it's a kind of enthusiasts are working on something instead of actually positioning it at a very high level and should be around decision-making table. And then we should stop, as Thomas mentioned earlier, we should stop pretending that we are doing innovation and then engaging volunteers and expecting spectacular results. We need to have a professional people with a very well-defined process with capabilities, engage external experts as needed, and make sure that the innovation people are sitting around the decision-making table.
And Tom?
For me, it really comes down to three main things, which is first, actually investing in the effort of innovation, and which leads into a mindset shift, but also having a mindset that innovation is a value-driving activity and that you really have to invest in learning and understanding, which is at its core. So it can't just be treated like the Christmas party. You have to actually treat it as an ongoing capability that you're building on and using in a strategic way to really drive that value. And that really comes down to, I suppose, my third point, which is that ongoing investment in learning, in doing innovation properly, and in that capability.
Well, like I said, the time to say goodbye, it is approached and now it's here. And so goodbye to you both, Munib and Tom. It's been delightful having you on the program, and thank you very much for your time, and we'll speak again soon.
And Brent, thank you very much for inviting us here. We really enjoy talking about our favorite topic, and we hope that some of the things that we discussed will be very useful for your audience.
I'm sure they will be.
Thanks, Brent. It's been an absolute pleasure.
No worries.